The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.
Fresh from a session with the House Ethics Committee, Idaho Congressman George Hansen rolls into the last weekend of the primary campaign, and he's lashing out at the press and his opponents.
In fact, I'd just like to tell you that this morning's newspaper in the other side of the state, where it says panelized punishment for Hansen, as far as I'm concerned, is really slanted journalism. The article apparently isn't quite as bad, but that kind of a headline, because they are not even considering that type of thing now. All they're doing is seeing whether they should go into it. This is a preliminary hearing, and I think that, especially right before an election, for elements of the press or your opposition or anybody else to be throwing that kind of stuff around is like throwing gas on fires, and it's just a lot of nonsense.
Tonight, a last look at the Hansen-Adamson race for Congress. Good evening. Congressman George Hansen blitzed across the state today, a final string of news conferences from Idaho Falls to Boise, heading into the final weekend of the campaign before the Idaho primary election next Tuesday. The videotape we just ran at the top of the broadcast was from Hansen's Pocatello news conference this morning, and the newspaper coverage he was so upset about was in today's editions of the Idaho Statesman here in Boise. Late today here, Hansen said again he is innocent of any wrongdoing and predicted that his opponents will, quote, have to be eating crow soon. And as you could tell, the congressman's voice has been through the mill on the campaign trail during the last few days. This has been one of George Hansen's toughest campaigns in a career of tough campaigns. If he survives against Jerome prosecutor Dan Adamson next week, he still faces a potentially strong Democratic candidate, Richard Stallings, in November. And he still faces a possible jail term on his 4 felony convictions for filing improper personal financial disclosure forms. Tonight, Paula Wissel looks at the 2 candidates on the campaign trail, and later on I'll be joined here by 3 journalists who have been watching the Hansen-Adamson race now for months. First, Paula Wissel.
Boy, this morning you got a loose hand? How are you?
Good.
Congressman Hansen seems to be running harder in this primary election than in previous ones. He's more visible in the district this time around and doing more traditional campaigning, appearing on forums with his opponent, making media appearances, and generally getting out and meeting the voters.
It's nice to see all of you here. Ladies are all dressed out in your fineries.
A recent campaign swing through eastern Idaho included this stop at Eastgate Nursing Home in Pocatello with wife Connie.
I tell you, Connie really pays attention to things like this, and she made sure that we had this nice flag today to present to your facility. Mayor, would you like to join me, please? Government is government at all levels, and we'd be just delighted to have you be a part of this if you would, and maybe you can help me spread it out to show them how large it is. So,
Oh, how beautiful.
This campaign day began for Hansen with a 7 a.m. breakfast in the town of Blackfoot, followed by a small meeting, one of several that day, in the home of a supporter. George Hansen hasn't bought radio or television advertising for this election. He is, however, using television on a grassroots level.
From Washington, Crossfire. Tonight, the conviction of Congressman George Hansen.
You ever watch that?
The focus of these home meetings is a 20-minute videotape of a cable news network Crossfire program, which Hansen appeared on shortly after his felony convictions. During the program, he is challenged by conservative Pat Buchanan and liberal Tom Braden.
So you knew that Bunker Hunt was lending money to your wife. So how could your financial affairs be separate? Well, let me say something.
Hansen aides explain that this program has helped turn around a lot of skeptics.
We didn't even realize it came out this well until we'd had several people that were really down after this happened. They watched this tape and called and said, George, go get them. We know you're right. And yet they've been ready to have us bail out and get somebody else to run in these places until they saw this tape. So it's done a great job for us. And so the reason Well, twofold is to have you aware of what's going on. Secondly, we would hope that you could show this to some of your family and friends and help us tell the story, because we're having no problem with anyone after they've once heard our side of the story. People say, well, after they see this, they say, well, we can see that he's going to win the case, and it'd sure be a shame for everybody to get scared and not keep him in with all the seniority and everything he's got, and then find out later that he gets totally cleared in the legal matter that's got everybody upset. And I think
About 60 copies of this program have been made and are now circulating and playing on home VCRs around the district.
The Justice Department is able to make this thing stick on me, then there's going to be a whole Congress there that's just like fish in a barrel. It could be shot.
One might think that a congressman convicted on several felony counts and running for re-election might shy away from talking about his problems, but not George Hansen. He calls his convictions a badge of honor and compares himself to the Founding Fathers challenging England. Using his favorite dragon slayer analogy, he says, "We've cut off the dragon's tail and he turned around and took a bite out of us."
I've helped keep businessmen out of jail in their fights with OSHA and this type of thing, keep farmers out of jail in their fights with the Justice Department, the Immigration Service, help Christians get out of jail in their fights with people who think that they shouldn't have the right to have independent schools and things like that. So I really feel that we're in a day and age where government is so aggressive and so pushy that the people have to push back, and that's what we're doing. You know, we're in a day and age now where it isn't just people like myself, and I think that's really the whole thing, where you've got so many laws that the government can give anybody trouble. They can try to make a criminal out of most anyone.
At some of the meetings, turnout was lighter than expected, but those in attendance were staunch believers.
He hasn't stolen from anybody. He's paid his income tax on every dollar that he's ever made, and I think most people are beginning to realize that it's mostly that it's a personal attack on George. And when it comes right down to it, they're going to vote for him.
Ma'am, can I introduce myself real fast? My name's Dan Adamson.
Hello.
And I'm running for Congress here in the 2nd District. I'd like to ask for your support.
Okay.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Adamson, Idaho's next congressman.
Public office is a high calling. Our congressman must be above reproach and work hard for Idaho.
Dan is that rare kind of leader, made of conviction, integrity, and decency. Dan Adamson, prosecuting attorney, farmer, and civic leader, will make a great congressman. He's the kind of citizen we need in Washington.
As a conservative Republican, I'll fight hard to preserve the Constitution. I need your vote.
For pride, for trust, the move is to Adamson.
George Hansen's primary opponent, Dan Adamson, has spent most of his campaign money on television and radio ads. He says it's necessary to develop name identification with the voters. In his daily campaign stops, speeches to exchange and Rotary clubs, visits to newspaper offices and the like, Adamson mentions Hansen's legal difficulties, but says he has tried to concentrate on the issues.
We're hearing people all over the district say, we're tired of politics as usual. We're tired of ineffective representation in Congress. We're tired of telling you what we're interested in and not being listened to. We are tired of paying to have a congressman back in Washington that is doing nothing for us at this particular time. In 1984, because of one problem or another, or at his own choosing, he is now last man on the totem pole in the entire U.S. Congress for the number of times that he's voting since '84 started on the issues that have come before Congress. That's not the type of representation we need. We need an effective voice in Washington. Now, besides that, as I mentioned when we started here, we have been doing everything in our power to campaign on the issues ever since November 3rd.
And on the issues, it's difficult to find any great differences between the candidates. Adamson talks about the dangers of deficit spending by the federal government, the importance of tougher drug enforcement laws, and the need to limit big government. But his speeches don't have the flamboyance or almost religious fervor of Hansen's.
We have this economical situation, which is literally a war within our own boundaries that we've got to get corrected as quickly as possible. We have not been out, spitting upon our opponent, letting blood, so to speak, and doing those things that would make it a nice media presentation. We think that there's something more out there We've stuck to the issues, we've talked to the issues, we've let other people identify the, where the blood had to be let. Hello, folks. I'd like to say hello real fast. My name's Dan Adamson. I'm running for Congress here in the 2nd District.
You just talked.
Just talking. Oh, yes, I did.
Adamson is not a seasoned campaigner. Younger and less experienced than Hansen, this is his first run for regional office.
Occasionally, what you end up with is a situation where you've talked to someone 2 hours before in another shopping center, and it's a little embarrassing, but you just have to do the best you can. If we have 65, 70,000 people in the 2nd Congressional District go out and vote, Dan Adamson is going to lose, because Congressman Hansen has some exceptionally strong support over in eastern Idaho. Don't ask me what's wrong with those people over there. All I can do is have pity upon them.
This statement, made while in Boise, was followed the next day by an apology to eastern Idaho television viewers.
We feel that we've got quite a bit of strength in the Bannock County and in the Bonneville County areas. But we definitely have some work to do up in the Upper Snake, the Madison, Jefferson, and Fremont counties.
Adamson disagrees with some political analysts who say he hasn't caught the imagination of the voters, that his campaign hasn't caught fire.
In 1978, I was Jim Jones's campaign manager when he ran against the congressman the first time. In that entire period of time, we only came up with 4 or 5 county coordinators out of 26 counties. People just weren't willing to get out and help us. When the Adamson for Congress campaign, this time around, out of the 26 counties, we have 23 coordinators. The organization grew so fast and with such quality people that we instituted 4 regional positions. We have 3 full-time paid members on the staff.
Some Democrats are saying they will cross over in the primary and vote for you because they think Stallings has a better chance of beating you. How do you feel about that?
I've always felt it's best just to be forthright and honest and on top of the table and don't play games with the public, and I think the public appreciates it. If the Democrats want to play that kind of game, they're going to have to take some chances. It could bite them.
Do you think you could beat Stallings?
Of course, we beat him before, and I think all the indications are that just like in the Crest races before, first time was close, the second time was bigger. I think this time the makings are there for us to have an even better victory.
If it's a Hansen-Stallings race, it's the nice little history teacher from Rexburg going up against Big Bad George with 4 felony counts. If Stallings has to face Dan Adamson in the general election, then it suddenly becomes conservative versus liberal, because I don't care what Stallings says, he's a liberal. This area is predominantly a conservative Republican area, and if given the opportunity, they're going to put that kind of person back in Congress.
We'll continue our look now at the Hansen-Adamson race with 3 journalists who have been watching the race unfold for some time now. Roger Porter is the editor-publisher of the Rexburg Standard Journal newspaper in Rexburg. Upper Snake River Valley country has been a Hansen stronghold in the past. Randy Staples edits the editorial page for the Idaho State Journal newspaper in Pocatello and has been covering George Hansen for years. And Gene McNeil is the executive producer of this broadcast and a seasoned political watcher. Let me start, Gene, with a little region-by-region analysis of how this race looks just a few days before the vote. Southwestern Idaho, never been a particularly strong George Hansen area.
Never has been. Ada County particularly has not been. For that reason, of course, Adamson thinks he will do well here. He undoubtedly will do well here. The question, I think, that he raises about the turnout is an important one. If he can motivate the Republican voters in Ada County to get out and vote, it'll help him a lot. If the turnout is light, the margin by which he wins Ada County is undoubtedly not going to be enough to carry him through some of the negative areas that I think we'll be talking about.
What's your sense about the level of campaign activity here? Many times in the past, Hansen has hardly made an appearance in Ada County before the election. He was here, well, he was on this program last Friday and was here again today briefly.
It's certainly, the pace has picked up in the last week or so, but I am still a little bit surprised, given the hotness of this race, that it hasn't picked up even more. I don't see the number of signs I think I should see on either side. I just don't see I don't hear people talking about it as much as I expected them to.
Yeah. Randy Staples in Pocatello, what's your thumbnail sketch of how this race shapes up at this point in southeastern Idaho? And I guess I'm particularly thinking, first off, about Bannock County.
Well, Bannock County has usually been kind of a marginal area for Hansen and his opponents. Bannock County is supposed to be a fairly strong Democratic area, but that's not really true. It's kind of a marginally Democratic area. And in Republican primaries, Hansen's always done, well, Hansen's had varied turnouts depending on the circumstances. For this area overall, Hansen ought to do fairly well. I think that in the western half of the district, from Magic Valley on west, Adamson ought to do fairly well. But once you get past the Raft River areas, start getting into eastern Idaho, out into the more rural areas that way, Hansen's going to do, I think, progressively better.
And that has not changed despite all of the adverse publicity attached to him over the last few months?
Well, I think that kind of picture hasn't changed, but the percentages and numbers that may have changed. Hansen isn't going to get the same numbers of swing votes that he got before. As far as I can see, the main question that the election night should settle this year should be to what extent Hansen has retained his core group, to what extent his people are still as unified and as dedicated as they were before. If he's able to keep that group intact, and I think that's what he's been working at with his home tapes, other things like this, if he can keep that group intact, then I think he's got a fair shot in a small turnout.
Randy, I think you wrote last Sunday that your best guess is that hardcore is about 35 to 40% of the Republican vote.
In ordinary times, my big question, and I don't have an answer for it, and I don't think anybody else does either, is what that hardcore is right now. I think it's certainly decreased from what it was. There are those who say that it's gone down to as low as 20 or 25%. I doubt that he's lost that many people, but the big question is, how many has he lost? And I don't think even Hansen or his people know for sure, because there is so much pressure within that group that many people who may be a little bit turned off, a little bit uneasy, may not really want to say so.
I see. Roger Porter from Rexburg is with us tonight in Pocatello as well. Roger, you heard Dan Adamson say there on the videotape that he had a little work to do in the upper Snake River Valley. What's your reading of the race in your home country?
I think George is going to do about the same that he always does up there. Dan Adamson's comments about people in the upper valley and eastern Idaho being a little funny, I think hurt him a little bit with the moderate Republicans, but there aren't that many moderate Republicans in that part of the area, so I just think George is going to do quite well as normal. Everything that I see, people still think that George Hansen is being picked on. They think that he represents the little guy. He's a conservative populist who is doing very well, and the people of my part of the state think that that's just what they want.
I'm not surprised to hear you say that, but when we talked earlier today on the phone, you said that you had not seen much evidence of Adamson this week, and he made a point here on Tuesday of saying how important it was to get over there and make himself visible the last few days of the campaign.
When I talked earlier, that was the case. We, in our newspapers in Rexburg and St. Anthony Ashton and Rigby, we ran a pre-printed advertising supplement for Adamson this week. Just about an hour before I came to Pocatello to participate on this program, one of his supporters in Rexburg called and said he's going to be in Rexburg in about an hour. Why don't you come over and send a reporter? So he is up there presumably right now, and he is making a push in that area.
But as you read it on this Friday night before the election, it's probably not going to be enough to make much of a dent in Congressman Hansen's hardcore support there.
I don't think so. The only thing that I keep thinking is how George Hansen's claim to being picked on is going to fly. Most of the people in the area that I live in are very law-abiding, honest people. And it depends on how well he's been able to sell his idea of being picked on by the Justice Department.
Well, do you have a feel for that, how well he has been able to sell it?
No. I've talked to a few people who say that I don't care whether he's guilty or not. he's got so many financial obligations and he's in debt to so many people that regardless of whether he's guilty as charged or not, he still cannot be an honest congressman as long as he is obligated to the point that he is. But there are a lot of other people that just say, I don't care what he does. He stands up for me, he does what I think is right, and that old populist spiel that I don't know how to get, I don't know how anybody overcomes that unless they become, I can do more for the little guy than you can.
Right. Randy, what's your best guess as to how that message has gone over? Has he sold it, do you think?
I think it varies from person to person or group to group. We've gotten letters to the editor from some of his longtime supporters who've said that, who have essentially repeated Hansen's line all the way through, that this is another example of the establishment going after our congressman that's trying to help us. We have had some cases of individuals writing in to say that whether or not he's being picked on, he is no longer effective. We as Republicans have got to go a different route. And this has come in some cases from some very long-time supporters. Now, again, my question, as I kind of raised earlier, is to what extent are people doing that and simply not desiring to be very vocal about it? I think it's kind of difficult to gauge.
Randy, I don't know how I'd gauge it either, but you know, it's amazed me to watch the last couple of weeks how skillfully Hansen has taken what you would have thought would have been an incredible political liability and turned it, at least in some people's minds, and we really don't know how many, into a plus.
But he's done this before. This is not the first time he's done this kind of thing.
With this serious a liability, though,
well,
it is, isn't it?
This is more serious than others, but the principle is the same. In '76, he had the 2 convictions at that time, and he turned it in again into exactly the same kind of liability. People are after me because I'm trying to protect you.
Well, Roger Porter says he's able to do that because people identify with him because he's identified with the little guy,
sure,
person who's battling the bureaucracy and all that sort of thing.
Sure, and it was the same principle. It was that principle that he used in '76, in '78 after Mrs. Hansen's fundraising. In each time, he's been able to do that. This is simply an extension of that principle.
Randy, did Adamson's gaffe, which he made here this week about having pity on people who had voted for George Hansen in the past, did that hurt him over there?
Somewhat. I'm not sure that it probably changed too many minds. I think that what the subject of George Hansen is a great deal like the subject of Frank Church was in 1980. Most people probably have made up their minds some time ago, or their minds are made up far too deeply to be swayed by a single comment.
Does the same thing hold for the charges that Adamson has made this week about the unaccounted for $30,000 debt in the congressman's latest campaign report?
Yeah, I don't think it makes too much difference. I will say that these things may make more difference to some extent on Hansen's side probably than they do on Adamson's, because I think Hansen's efforts depend so heavily on the dedication and hard work of his people, of his supporters. If they don't get out there and do what they have been doing in the past campaigns, he's going to be in trouble. So I think he's more dependent on that kind of dedication and that kind of loyalty than Adamson is.
Well, Gene, we've been talking here about how well skillfully Congressman Hansen has handled a difficult situation, but I think you are one who believes that Adamson has really sharpened up his presentation in the last month or two.
It certainly seems to me that in the last month or two, and even particularly in the last 2 weeks, and I'd be interested to know if the other two have seen any of this, I'm seeing a different Dan Adamson. The common political wisdom up until a couple of weeks ago was that he simply was not aggressive enough, that he wasn't taking the risks, that he wasn't attacking George Hansen, that he was trying to step back too much and be too cautious. And I've seen a different Dan Adamson. I think the interview he did here on Tuesday night, other things I've seen, he's just, something has happened and he's come out of the chute fighting now.
Randy, I think you've said before that the way to go after George Hansen is to really go after him, to get down and dirty and sling a little mud. And some have faulted Adamson for not doing that. They faulted Richard Stallings 2 years ago for not doing that sort of thing.
Or if not necessarily getting down and slinging a lot of mud, at least going after him very energetically.
Right.
The point was made during the video report we saw earlier that Adamson's speeches did not have the same kind of force that Hansen put into his. And I agree with Gene. I see a good deal of growth in that area suddenly. In his earliest confrontations with Hansen face-to-face, he didn't come off as being very energetic. He just kind of lost out in the energy battle between the two of them. But more recently, I agree, especially in a few meetings in the Magic Valley, which didn't get a lot of attention throughout the district, Adamson came on and did probably about as well as Hansen, which, considering Hansen's strength, is something.
Roger, what about the turnout on Tuesday? Adamson says it has to be big if he hopes to win. Do you foresee a big turnout, I guess? Is there much interest in this? Are people talking about it, I guess?
We have several races in our part of the state that I think there's going to be an excellent turnout. And then, of course, Georgia's people are always ready to turn out.
Well, I guess Adamson's thinking is, anyway, that if Georgia's people will turn out anyway, and if the turnout is bigger, that's likely to turn out more anti-Hansen voters. Possible?
Possible. Our races are in both parties, so I'm not certain that there's going to be an advantage for either candidate.
Right. Randy, you heard Paula Whistle mention the crossover vote a moment ago. What about the crossover vote? I guess what we mean by that is Democrats crossing over from their primary and voting in the Republican primary.
I don't think it'll have that much effect on it, to tell the truth. I'm not sure that the numbers will be that great. There are not that many heavy contests. The only one of wide interest is this one in the southern half of the state. In Bannock County, in our area, this will be the only race that's really gotten much public interest or attention. And there are isolated places throughout the district where that isn't true, but for the most part it is. And I think the Democrats that do cross over will split their theories. I think Hansen's own analysis was right about that. Some will take the notion that Hansen would be easier to beat. Others would take the notion that this is our chance to get George out of that seat. I don't think it'll have too much effect ultimately.
Gene?
Well, I think Randy's right that it probably won't have that much effect ultimately, but I also think it's one of the most interesting little political stories that's going on here. I think Randy's absolutely right, and the interesting thing is that it tends to be the political pros in the Democratic Party that are taking the theory, this time let's cross over and vote for George Hansen instead of voting against him.
Thinking that he'll be weaker against Richard Stallings in November than Adamson.
Of course, what they'll probably end up doing is canceling out the votes of other Democrats who haven't gotten that word and continue to cross over and vote against George as they have in the past.
Prediction, quickly. Hansen, Adamson on Tuesday.
Hansen.
Hansen. Randy?
I agree.
I agree. I agree.
Well, we thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight in Pocatello. Mr. Porter, for driving so far and being with us. We appreciate it. And Randy, thank you. Always good to have you. Gene, thank you. That's our time for tonight. We'll be back here on Monday when we'll look at reapportionment and how it might affect next Tuesday's election. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.